Hello, and welcome to the 404 Media Podcast, where we bring you unparalleled access to hidden worlds, both online and IRL. 404 Media is a journalist-founded company and needs your support. To subscribe, go to 404media.co. As well as bonus content every single week, subscribers also get access to additional episodes where we respond to their best comments. Gain access to that content at 404media.co. I'm your host, Joseph, with an obviously sore throat, and with me are 404 Media co-founders Sam Cole.
Hello.
Emmanuel Mayberg.
Hey, what's up?
And Jason Kebler.
Hello, hello. Do we want to celebrate?
Should we clap?
Let's clap.
Thank you. I guess I'll clap.
We're clapping. Why are we clapping, Joseph?
Today, my book finally came out, Dark Wire, the incredible true story of the largest sting operation ever. I can never remember the subtitle. But there's an adapted feature in Wired magazine. I guess I'll put a link in the show notes. So definitely read through that if you want to have a vibe of what the book is like. But on Thursday, I'm also going to upload an interview that I did with Bradley Hope over at Project Brazen. Well, he interviewed me about the book, and then listeners can get more details about it there. But of course, I encourage you to get a copy in hardback or audiobook or whatever you like. If you enjoy this podcast, I do think you'll enjoy the book, and I'm not just saying that. All right, let's go into the stories. The first one, Google leak reveals thousands of privacy incidents. This is one that I wrote, but I mean, we kind of all basically worked on because we got this leak and then we had to go through it. The database itself that we got is these self-reported potential security and privacy issues. So if you work at Google, you are encouraged to, when you come across some sort of issue, maybe somebody sent an email with personal information, or maybe there's a vulnerability in a piece of software inside Google or outside, or maybe there's something really, really bad like a data breach, you're encouraged to report these potential issues to, the privacy and or security team. And I think pretty surprisingly, we have a copy of that database. It stretches from, I think, 6 years ending in 2018. There are thousands of incidents in there, which I don't think is surprising, to be clear. And I think we'll get into the nuances a little bit. And I'll describe some incidents as well. I'm going to ask Emmanuel about a specific incident about Nintendo a little bit later on. But Jason, maybe just you first, because we got this data and then we're looking through it. I know I went through it in a little bit more detail than you did, but you did also rummage through it. What was your sort of impression when you started reading the data?
Yeah, I think that there's a few different ways that we can look at this. I think, first of all, it is an employee database where basically like employees were self-reporting privacy incidents, more or less. And so they would report them and then they would be investigated by some team at Google. And then Google was sort of determining, did something actually go wrong here and what went wrong? And I've actually seen databases like this before from government agencies, sort of like through FOIAs, where we file FOIA, and there'll be like Inspector General reports, which is basically like the oversight groups that make sure NASA is following the law and stuff. And there's basically like a lot that goes wrong at any gigantic organization. And Google is one of the largest organizations on earth. If you think about it, it's like there's many different arms. There's so many employees, blah, blah, blah. Like things fall through the cracks or things just like go wrong. And you want there to be some sort of process for documenting these things and making sure that they're fixed. And so there is a world in which a database like this does not exist and all of these privacy things happen and they're not caught and they're not fixed. And that is a bad world. It's
Right.
like we sort of like want these things to be documented. At the same time, it's like you're scrolling through and there's a lot of bad stuff in here. There's like a lot of incidents, more than you'd guess. And sort of the things that go wrong were incredibly varied. Do you want to mention like a few of the ones that stood out to you?
Yeah, I can read out a few of them. Later on in the piece, I do sort of like a bullet point list because, again, there's thousands. So we just pulled out sort of what were the highest priority ones or ones that were otherwise noteworthy. While I was verifying the database, I figured out that there's a priority rating in, P4, P3, right up to P0, P0 being the highest priority, P1 being below that. And that's the priority that the person reporting the incident attributes to it. So, sometimes they could be wrong, but often was the case. I type in P0, Control F, and, okay, that's a pretty big one. That's pretty interesting. So some of those noteworthy examples was that Google's Street View systems were accidentally transcribing and storing license plate numbers from photos, which is not supposed to be the deal, right? It's supposed to be privacy preserving, and that data is not supposed to be stored. That was stored for some amount of time. And in the report itself, there's actually a quote from somebody where it says, "I want to emphasize that this was an accident." And then they go on to say it was fixed, blah, 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 but it still happened. There was another one where more than 1 million users' email addresses of a company called Socratic that Google acquired, those were exposed in sort of the source of the website. We just go on view page source, and then also like the GPS locations as well, and that could have impacted children. That was exposed for over 1 year and could have already been harvested and then eventually fixed. And then there's a few about children's like speech data where Google accidentally has been collecting speech that it believes from children, perhaps because they're using a certain part of the app, or I think there was a UI issue of the keyboard as well, so there was all that sort of stuff. But it goes on and on and on, and I won't read this full list, and people should just go read the article if they don't want to see the full one. But sort of what I implied at the top, it stretches from like the very mundane, which is, I sent an email and it contained like somebody's address or something like that to an outside contractor I didn't mean to. Then there's like this stuff in the middle, which is like, the carpool feature of Waze, that has a like ride sharing, whatever it was, company. It leaked the trips and home addresses of other users. And then you go right to the other end of the spectrum, and it's stuff like there's about to be a raid on our office in Jakarta, like really, really serious stuff. So it stretches across all of those. I kind of want to say and step back a little bit, and it touches on what Jason said, is that it's good that Google has a list like this. It would be very, very alarming if it didn't. It would be very surprising if it didn't as well. And it does show that, and I hate to say the line, they take privacy and security very seriously, which is in every statement ever, but it shows that they're actually doing it. And some people may ask, well, why are you reporting on this? This is a non-story. I'm paraphrasing some stuff, but and I can see that argument. But my response is that there's a public interest in basically understanding anything that Google does because it is so powerful and integral to our everyday lives. It's Gmail, it's infrastructure, it's Android, it's basically everything for a lot of people. So even seeing a copy of the database where they are taking security seriously is still like incredibly important. If this was like a smaller company, like a mid-tier or even a smaller company than that, there would be less of a public interest. It's like, okay, who cares? But Google is in every single aspect of our lives, basically. You can't use the internet without encountering Google in some way,
It's a good reality check on what kind of data the company is dealing with. And it's like not even a value judgment, but knowing that you use Gmail and knowing they use Google and knowing they use Google Maps and knowing they use all these services is quite different than seeing the list of incidents that come up on a, I would assume, daily basis at the company. Just how powerful it is, even if it's doing a good job, right? Which is like, we're seeing, when we see this list, as you say, we're seeing the company do a good job, but so much data concentrated in one entity, it's a good reality check on like the power of the company.
I found a lot of the like quote unquote not serious incidents to be interesting also, and they don't really rise to the level of being worth mentioning in an article, but taken in aggregate, it's very interesting, where it will be things like an internal Google employee accidentally sent like an internal Google document to a random email address, like because of a typo. There's incidents where like a cloud customer wanted to do like tech support on their own, Google account, and that data was sent to like a wrong company or someone else. There's a lot of like, we accidentally were tracking the location of a specific subset of users through something, and like, we didn't mean for these like cross app permissions to happen in this specific way. And I think that's part of what made this story quite hard to do, is because there's thousands and thousands of these incidents. The database that we got is kind of old. Like it spans what, 2013, 2018? Is that?
Yeah, I think that's the period. Yeah.
And that's not just like some of the things, and the ones that you mentioned are quite bad and quite alarming, that they happen during any time period, and most of this stuff was never reported publicly. So I think even though sometimes, despite the fact that some of it is old, it is still quite relevant and important given all of the things that you just said, the size of Google, that sort of thing. But it's like Google has only grown in power since then. And that's not to say that these incidents have stopped happening. It's just that the data set that we got was from this time period. So I think reality check is a good way of looking at it.
Yeah. Just for fairness sake, of course, let me just read out Google's. I think this is the full statement, and it's just one paragraph. I think it is reading worth in full. At Google, employees can quickly flag potential product issues for review by the relevant teams. When an employee submits the flag, they suggest the priority level to the reviewer. The reports obtained by 404 are from over 6 years ago and are examples of these flags. Everyone was reviewed and resolved at that time. In some cases, these employee flags turned out to not be issues at all, or were issues that employees found in third-party services. The only issue I have with that is they call us 404 and not 404 Media. That's a brand mistake. Otherwise, we're going to fall in, with the 404 errors and stuff. But no, I think that's a very fair statement, and I wanted to get that across. And I think we treated it very fairly. It's not like, oh my God, look at all of these breaches and that sort of thing. It's kind of what our manual said. You would see this basically same database inside Microsoft, right? Or you would see it inside Amazon, but we never get to see a big tech company's internal database. And I think I saw someone on a social network asking, like, are you going to share this and like publish it and that sort of thing? It's like, I'm not going to publish the full thing because there's actually PII in the database itself of just like random Google employees. Like, I'm not going to put a random Google employee on blast, especially when they're doing the right thing by reporting this issue. You know what I mean? And that was sort of another decision we had to do, where not only is there so much data here to go through, it's like, well, when we do focus on an incident, what do we pull out? I mean, I'm not going to pull out the name of a random Google person, but if it's a senior employee, maybe we'll mention that. I don't think that ultimately came up, but this was complicated, I think, for that reason. And I guess on the reporting, we actually, we've had this data for a while, and I knew that this was going to be quite complicated for Google to comment on, because it's like, we have a whole database that should not have left your company. You can't just send a flippant email and be like, hey, give me a response in 24 hours. I think we ended up giving them like 2 or 3 weeks, basically, which is pretty insane for, I mean, maybe not any piece of journalism, but like normal tech investigations journalism, you never give 2 weeks. And it's because I wanted to give them specific incidents that we may or may not point to in the article. And we ended up doing it to the vast majority of them, because each of these are, allegedly a data breach or something similar in its own right. And if you have context or comment on this, like maybe this didn't happen, you know what I mean? I want to know about it.
Also, we're the most fair reporters to ever work in the business. No, that's also part of it.
Dude, I would
That
never
is
say that, but I
true.
totally agree. Yeah.
I want to say again, because after you publish the article, a bunch of people have asked me, like, are you publishing the full database? And I'm sure that you've gotten some of that. And you just addressed that. But I guess it's like, theoretically, it would be nice to publish the database. Like, I would theoretically want it to be published, but I don't know how we would do so responsibly, because of the nature of how it is. It's not just the names of specific Google employees who are reporting things. It's like specific users and random people, and the database itself is not in any way sanitized for that sort of thing. There are names of like individual companies, individual people who have nothing to do with Google, and to clean it of that data would first of all make it pretty unintelligible. I think that you would have to remove so much stuff to responsibly publish the full database that it would no longer be that useful. And two, it would be incredibly time consuming. I thought about like, oh, maybe we can scrub some PII out of this and publish it, and it would be responsible. And I think it would be like a months long undertaking. And it's just a security issue. I sort of I understand why people would want to see the full database, like, but it's just very tricky. And every once in a while, a story comes up like this where it's like, we can't responsibly dump these files, in my opinion.
And we love dumping files. We love publishing like source documents or anything like that, or databases or whatever we can get a hold of. But it just seems a little bit difficult here. Excuse me. So let's just briefly talk about a story that we spun off pretty quickly from, and this is included in the list, but we then expanded upon it. Google contractor used admin access to leak info from private YouTube video. Emmanuel, should I read out the report first and you can tell us what you think, or do you just want to take it? What do you want to do?
Read it out, yeah.
All right. Oh, shit. Well, I have to find it. Give it a second. So it says that a Google employee apparently accessed private videos in Nintendo's YouTube account yesterday, leaking the information to the internet well ahead of Nintendo's public E3 announcement, the reporter wrote. And they included a couple of links to Reddit. And basically on there, somebody had posted some screenshots related allegedly to an upcoming Nintendo announcement. The report said they can... well, that's the thing with these reports. It's actually quite difficult to get the full context. And again, that's why I went to Google with so much time, because I wanted them to provide more context on the instance we were interested in, but they didn't really do that in the end. So we kind of just have to go what's in the reports. But it looks like they did an internal investigation. They concluded the exposure was non-intentional. And then the rest of the report says a former TVC, which stands for temporary vendor contractor, download video with admin account and shared unreleased Nintendo feature with friend. GI interview concluded non-intentional. Reactive com sent. So, Emmanuel, why did that jump out to you as a particularly interesting case?
Because Nintendo, man. It's like raids in Jakarta, children's voices, location. That's all well and good. But when is Yoshi coming out? That is what people really care about. In all seriousness, though, like, we looked at the list, and I think both Jason and I saw the Nintendo thing, and we were like, this is what's going to stick with people. And there's two reasons. One is just like people really care about Nintendo and know what it is. And it's like a weird thing to have included in this like long list of very serious incidents. And then the other thing is, and there's actually, I don't know if you've seen this, but there's been some follow-up reporting on this.
Oh, no.
Since you published. Because Nintendo leaks are like their own mini ecosystem of media.
YouTubers all around it and everything.
Yeah, it's like there is like Jason Schreier at Bloomberg who does like a ton of scoops about what is happening at game companies, but then there's like my uncle works at Nintendo and he saw the next Yoshi, and that's like just its own separate media world, and people really care about that. And the way it works is kind of mysterious. Like some of it does seem legit, and some of it is totally made up. And this Yoshi thing is like, oh, my friend has access to the back end of YouTube, and he saw that they're going to drop Yoshi tomorrow. Sounds like a fake thing, but it's real.
Yeah, because one of the YouTube comments from the poster, he follows up. We're not sure of their identity, right? And they say that my friend works at Google, and it's like, sure, mate,
Sure, dude.
whatever. And then the game was announced because it was the same day, right? It was just a few hours before, and then you see the replies, and people are like, "Damn, dude, sorry, you were telling the truth."
Yeah, so that is all like very newsworthy. And then I would also just like more seriously is we noticed because like let's say Motherboard has like a doc that we're going to drop. The way you do that is not like you upload it the minute that you wanted to go live. It's like you preload it to YouTube and you keep it private, and then you flip the switch. And it's the same thing for like product reveals, right? Like if Apple has a new iPhone, or if OpenAI has a new product, whatever it is, it's like they preload it to YouTube and just flip the switch when it's go time. And the idea that like a random contractor can like, I don't know, see like the next iPhone and like place bets on the stock market or something,
or whatever.
You know what I
Yeah.
Yeah, it just like that's a pretty serious thing.
Yeah.
You've written about this many times, Joseph, but it's at the insider threat where like someone at Snapchat, an employee at Snapchat, or an employee at Facebook, or an employee at Tinder will go on a date with someone or something, and then they will use their admin or privileged access to stalk that person by using their like staff employee admin login to like read someone's Facebook messages or something like this. And you've done a handful of stories about that sort of thing. And that is like very bad abuse of power from within a tech company. And the fact that a Google contractor can look at the private videos of its users, I don't know if everyone knows that that is possible. And then the fact that it was abused in this instance is quite bad.
Yeah, I covered the inside threat at Motherboard a lot. There was a MySpace story about how people there had something called God mode, I think it was, and they could just look at everything, which was really insane, like DMs and all that sort of stuff. One of the best stories, or rather one of the ones like I enjoyed most, was insider threats at Snapchat, where there was a tool called Snap Lion that allows you to do this sort of thing. And just, yes, I did Facebook as well, and I think there were some other companies, but I got really interested in it because everybody was talking about, unique passwords and two-factor authentication. And that, like, I did a lot more of just like straight, hard InfoSec reporting at Motherboard. And then like, it turns out if there's just like a guy who's mad inside the company, they can just like bypass it, And I think we saw that ultimately with the big Twitter hack, right? Where somebody gained insider access and then leveraged the tools that were meant to be used by Twitter insiders for their own gains. And yes, leaking ahead of time that there's going to be a Yoshi game on Nintendo Switch, I think there is a significant public interest in revealing that. No, obviously not. Who cares about Yoshi, man? I just want a new Mario game on the new Switch. But yeah, you're right. I don't think people realize that the insider threats could happen at basically any sort of company, and it's going to bypass all sorts of protections, right? All right, let's leave that there. And when we come back, we're going to be talking about sort of the legislative movement around deepfakes and the people that, it may leave behind. We'll be right back after this. All right, and we are back. This is one that Sam wrote. laws about deepfakes can't leave sex workers behind. Sam, you made like a really, really interesting point in here that I kind of embarrassingly just hadn't really considered enough until you wrote it and I read it. And it's so obvious now. There are 2 people in every deepfake. What do you mean by that exactly?
I mean, there are 2 people, and lately there are like millions of people in generative AI deepfakes. But in the traditional, like the traditional deepfake, the OG deepfake use of the word, you would have the person that you're targeting, so to speak. So like the person who's not a porn worker. And then you would have a video from a porn scene. So that features a porn worker, a sex worker, a performer who did not, authorize or approve that use of their body in this way. So yeah, that's kind of how it's always been, is, you would have someone's face plastered on someone else's body. And the focus has been on the person who's identifiable, so to speak, like by their face. But you also have someone who's being erased completely in that image as far as their face, and it's just their body being used and exploited for malicious means, sometimes for blackmail, for funsies. And then we have generative AI that creates new images wholesale based on data sets that are full of sex workers' images and stolen from places like Reddit or, OnlyFans, downloaded from there, or off of social media. So yeah, that's kind of the concept there is, we need to acknowledge everyone being taken advantage of in deepfakes when they're used maliciously.
Yeah. And I'm going to read out another quote and just basically ask you to explain it again. But to preface it a little bit, it's like there is so much obsession, especially over the past few years, with deepfakes and like disinformation and interfering with elections and politics and all of that sort of thing. And of course, when you first exposed deepfakes years and years ago, it was about harassment and it was about repurposing, obviously, real human beings for, sexual gratification a lot of the time. And you get into this a little bit, but it's like people have finally come around and they've realized, oh, it was about that the entire time, right? So I think you have this quote here: there would be no deepfakes without sex workers, and specifically without a disregard for their labor, boundaries, and bodily autonomy. Is that the right interpretation of that quote? Is that what you're trying to say there, or what does it mean?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we see over and over and over, just for the past 7 years or so, that deepfakes have been around. Political deepfakes and deepfakes, meant to sway elections and things like that. They don't really work as intended. Like, they're not, if they're made to be like disinformation or misinformation, they don't work. Like, no one is really fooled by them, at least not in like US elections. Because people they can tell the difference on these things immediately. They can use lots of different context clues when it's someone that's that famous as a politician. But then when you have deepfakes used as, as harassment in a sexual way, the point isn't believability in a lot of cases. It's shaming someone. It's, crossing someone's boundaries. And without this social stigma against sex work as a profession, because sex work is the worst thing that you can do in the eyes of society as a woman, then that makes deepfakes powerful as a harassment tool. Even if it's not believable, even if it's not realistic. And a lot of times they're not, but a lot of times they are. And a lot of times they are, they're used as that kind of, that blackmail socially. So yeah, it's, there are a lot of layers to that side of it. And I kind of tried to unpack some of that here. I start to feel like a broken record on these things sometimes, but here we are anyway. So.
I mean, sometimes you got it, right? You just got to keep repeating the same thing in different ways until people start taking notice for it, and it's still valuable. But like so this piece is more specifically about the legislation side of things, what is the current status of laws against deepfakes across the US? Like, there are current ones and there are proposed ones, right? Like, what's the status?
So in most states, in the only places where laws are in place are, at the state level. Right now, there are no current federal laws against deepfake specifically, but on the state level, you have some states that they criminalize deepfakes specifically. Like the law will say the word deepfake, or it'll say like algorithmically manipulated or something. But in a lot of places, they also just amend or use or add to the laws that are already in place against non-consensual imagery online. So, there's a lot of places where this is already a law. I think there are like 11 states so far. There might be more. I'm sure if anyone listening knows, they would let me know in the comments.
That's
but as far as I could count,
that's actually quite a lot, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's been more and more in the past few years. But recently we've seen more of a push toward federal level laws that criminalize deepfakes specifically. Yeah.
So, and I think this kind of gets to the heart of the piece and basically my last question, which is like, okay, that's all well and good that, those are developing. There's going to be nuances with each law and each state and whatever. What is missing from these laws when it comes to, the sex workers who are also being exploited through the generation of these deepfakes? Or I guess, if it's not the laws, what's missing from the broader conversation?
I mean, I almost, with this story, it's like, I struggled with this story. Just for a little bit of context, I struggled with it for many months. I was wrestling a demon about it because it feels like addressing a problem that is not here yet, which is very classic deepfake reporting. And so I didn't want to like fall into that trap of like, I don't want to predict something that hasn't happened yet. But a lot of the times when we do that, we are right, because as Emmanuel said, we are the best in the business. But at the same time, we know, like, we have this historical context to look at with laws like FOSTA SESTA, which is a piece of sex trafficking legislation that makes platforms liable for what users post on their sites when it comes to trafficking. And that had such broad effects and such broad harms that I think we risk kind of falling into the same traps. And the reason why FOSTA SESTA is such a disaster, and it really was a disaster, it created more harms than it ever could have prevented, is because sex workers weren't involved in that conversation or weren't welcome into that conversation or consulted. And I'm seeing that happen now with like the federal pushes toward deepfakes laws. Is there's never any mention of consulting sex workers whose images are in all of these pieces of content, these pieces of harassment that they're trying to prevent. It's like, why wouldn't you talk to the people who are in all of these videos? And the legislators just don't go there. They talk to like victims' rights activists and advocates, which is great. They in recent months have started quoting conservative anti-pornography groups, which is scary. And because it's such a big mainstream topic, I don't think there's any excuse to not consult with sex workers at this point. There never was any excuse. That's kind of the basis that I was drawing from for this story. And I talked to sex workers and I talked to legal experts, and it's a long story and it's kind of wonky, but like I hope people read it, because I do think it's a bit of a warning. It's like when Emmanuel and I wrote about the Taylor Swift deepfakes, and it's like, okay, something bad is going to happen if we keep going down this road, and it feels very obvious, but sometimes you just have to lay it all out.
I think to the point that you've made a million times is very often these technologies are pointed at sex workers first, and it's like a harbinger for what comes for everyone on the internet. And an example that we've already seen is like on Instagram, the AI influencers that I wrote about are stealing videos from people who are not sex workers. They're just like influencers on Instagram, and often they're clothed, etc. But I do think that lawmakers are, I don't know, like they're reticent to talk to sex workers as people who deserve protection under the law. And I don't know if they're like worried about being seen as talking to a porn star. Like I'm not really sure. I think that's
Right.
probably to some extent what is happening here, but it's sad.
The reason that you're seeing more laws is that there has been several high profile deepfakes. One is Taylor Swift. That's obvious, and that's the reason for a lot of these. There's been a few cases at high schools, right, which kind of triggers like, oh my god, the children engine of politics. And then there's also been politicians themselves, right? Like AOC is pushing for one of these laws, I think, for on the federal level. And there was a profile of her. I'm sorry, I forget which publication it was, but it kind of tells the story of how she decided to invest more time in this, and that's because someone handed her a phone and there was a deep fake of her, right? And I have read many profiles like that are about the person whose face is being deep faked into a deep fake, and I have read 0 profiles of the bodies that are like the raw material of deepfakes. And I will say, to our credit, Sam and I have always, like, whenever we reported about a deepfake from the very beginning, we were like, obviously, who is the person whose face is being deepfaked into the porn, and like, who made this porn, right? And I think over the years, we've gotten quotes from sex workers who are in these videos whose faces are erased, and they're horrified, obviously, but nobody else talks to them. And I think that's because of what Jason said, where people kind of like don't want to be associated and don't want to converse with this industry. But I think also the people who make deepfakes and the people who worry about them, everyone treats pornography, again, as like the raw material of the internet. It's not like real people. It's not humans. It's just there's so much of it, and it's everywhere, and it's free, that it feels like this commodity that anyone can reach into and just like scoop up and use for whatever reason they want, and we see it in advertising, and we see it in deepfakes, and we see it in people pirating porn. And that is just kind of like the cultural norm about pornography. On the one hand, it's like this forbidden, taboo thing. And then on the other hand, since we're all doing it, right? Since we're all looking at it every day, all day, because it's being pushed to us from like every screen that we look at, we're just kind of like entitled to it. And that's why we see like these two ways of like treating the problem.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good way to put it. Excuse me. All right, we'll leave that there. If you're listening to the free version of the podcast, I'll now play us out. But if you are a paying subscriber, we're going to talk about that All Eyes on Rafa image, that went viral, and where it came from some dogged reporting from Jason. You can subscribe and gain access to that content at 404media.co. We'll be right back after this. As a reminder, 404 Media is journalist-founded and supported by subscribers. If you wish to subscribe to 404 Media and directly support our work, please go to 404media.co. You'll get unlimited access to our articles and an ad-free version of this podcast. You'll also get to listen to the subscribers-only section where we talk about a bonus story each week. Another way to support us is by leaving a 5-star rating and review for the podcast. That stuff really helps out. People have been doing that, and I'm going to read them next time. I forgot because I'm sick. I'm sorry. This has been 404 Media. We will see you again next week.